Good Thursday afternoon, everyone. Thanks for tuning in to the Southern Oregon Weather Midweek Update. I want to start with a snowpack update since our snowpack in the Southern Oregon Cascades and Siskiyous has most likely peaked for the season. And so I want to give you an idea of where we stand and what our summer water situation might look like. Then we'll talk about our short-range forecast, get into some teleconnections for our mid-range outlook, and then I want to conclude by talking about some larger seasonal trends, and in particular the El Niño Southern Oscillation. So first, NOAA satellite imagery shows clear skies over our area. This white that you see here is snow over the Cascades and Siskiyous. Clouds mainly to our south over central and southern California. That's the system that came through over the last week. It's departing to our south and stalling out a little bit over Southern California. So speaking of snow, this is our current snow water equivalent percent of normal across the state. So yellow areas are below average in terms of the water content in the snowpack for this time of year, and green areas are right around average, blue areas are higher than average. So this number might seem like it's significantly below average. However, the snow that fell over the last couple weeks has definitely improved our snowpack and water situation. A couple weeks ago, we were sitting right around 70% of average for snow water equivalent here in the Rogue-Umpqua Basin. But now these last couple systems that dropped snow, especially near Crater Lake, have bumped up this number to 86%. And here on the right, you can see that reflected as a trend line. This green line here is the average trend line across all seasons for snow water equivalent. And you can see we had some really big storms in January that moved us close to that green average line, but then the snow water equivalent pretty much flatlined. We didn't receive a lot of big storms at all for a couple of months until here recently in April and the end of March. You can see that line tick upwards just a little bit, but here you can see it's already starting to decline, and it'll continue to decline as our snowpack starts to melt off, because we're going to be seeing some warmer than average temperatures this month. Here has been the start to the month so far. First 8 days of April, pretty cool across the Pacific Northwest and the northern plains. It's also been quite wet, especially across California. Portions of Oregon also getting above average precipitation for the first week of this month. However, that's going to change. We have this big ridge of high pressure sitting over our area, and that's going to remain parked there for quite a while, driving most of the storminess into the east. Here's the Weather Channel's forecast for the next few days. You can see today calling for a high of 80 degrees. It certainly is a very warm, sunny day in Medford. That's quite a bit above average for this time of year. We would normally expect to see temperatures more in the upper 60s for Medford during this time of year. And you can see a slight cooling trend going on for the last few days of this week. As this ridge of high pressure moves northwest a little bit, it's going to move into the Gulf of Alaska, and that's going to allow some of this cooler air moving into the Rockies to maybe decrease our daytime highs and our overnight temperatures just a little bit. But overall, this general pattern is not going to change very much for the next week or 10 days. In the last forecast, we talked about how the models were still showing a cooler and wetter than average April for our area, but I talked about the angular momentum and some other teleconnections that were really showing that most of the cooler air could end up going into the central plains and into the Rockies, and that's definitely what is going to happen this month. I think we could be in store for a warmer and drier month overall because of that trend. So here's the MJO forecast from the European model. We see we're in phase 7 right now, but it's forecast to move into phases 8, 1, and 2. I also want to call your attention to this area of the Pacific Ocean too. This is what we call the ENSO region, the El Niño Southern Oscillation region. And it's divided up into subsections. So 1 and 2 are over here. Then region 3 is over here. 3.4 is the one that forecasters look at a lot when they're trying to make seasonal predictions in terms of where the ENSO is going to head, either toward an El Nino, in which waters are warmer along the equator here, or a La Nina, in which stronger easterlies cool the water here over the equator. So right now we're kind of in a warmish neutral state. See some cooler than average temperatures and some warmer than average temperatures. And when we combine this warmish neutral state with phases 8 and 1 of the Madden-Julian oscillation, this is what we get in April. So here on the left is phase 8. See all that ridging over British Columbia, extending down into our area, maybe some troughing farther to the southwest. That matches up very, very well with our 500 millibar height pattern currently. See this ridge over our area and the troughing to the southwest, with more of the storminess off to the east. It's a very, very good match for phase 8. Look at what happens in phase 1. That ridge is still dominating our weather. Maybe a little bit of undercutting going on here. That's not what the models are showing, and I think this ridge is going to remain pretty strong. If anything, we could see some shots of slightly cooler air as these storms ride up and over the ridge and move into the Rockies and Central Plains. But on the whole, a good match for the correlations that we see with a neutral ENSO state and MJO phase 1. So pretty neat to see how those correlations reflect the forecasts in the models as well. If we move on to phases 2 and 3, that's where the MJO's projected to head going later into April and into early May. We see this ridge still over our area. That's also what the models are showing. So that's a good indication of warmer and drier weather on average, or than average, for the next 10 days or 2 weeks. So a good portion of April. It's only toward the end of the month that we see that these correlations suggest that maybe a weakening of the ridge and some storms possibly moving into our area. And here the models certainly don't show the ridging as strong as they did earlier in the month. So at this time frame, 16 days out, that's as far as these ensembles go. And the 500 millibar trends here tend to get kind of washed out. The anomalies tend to get washed out. So that's when it's useful to look at these correlations with our MJO and with our ENSO to figure out what might happen. So this suggests that as the MJO moves into phase 3 toward the end of the month, that we could end April and start May on a slightly cooler and wetter note, but I think most of our April is going to be pretty spring-like, warmer and drier than normal. I also want to talk about the AAM, the atmospheric angular momentum, which is positive now, but it's forecast to drop. And here are the correlations. I've shown this map quite a bit. For a positive AAM, we would expect ridging just northwest of our area, which is what we're seeing currently. That ridging is really going to block storms from moving into our area over the next few weeks. But as this AAM falls, I would expect this ridging to weaken, which is another signal that getting toward the end of the month, around April 25th, we might see a return to some weaker storms moving into our area, maybe even as early as April 19th or 21st. So we'll have to see how that pans out. You can see also the Weather Channel is calling for precipitation chances to gradually increase toward the end of the month. So that lines up well with what we're seeing both in the models and in our teleconnections and global patterns. I want to conclude by briefly talking about ENSO. Here's this 3.4 region that I was talking about, and you can see the CFSV2 climate forecast system model is forecasting this region to cool and go from warmer than average to cooler than average over the summer. There are many different climate models that try to predict what's going to happen with sea surface temperatures over the equator. The CFSV2 is just one of them, and others aren't quite as strong with this downward trend in the SST anomalies. However, most of them do show cooling to near or below average by the summertime. And you can see this reflected in the subsurface temperature anomaly. So currently we have warmer than average water toward the surface here along the equator, and cooler than average water has been growing farther down, farther beneath the surface. You can see this pool of colder than average water expanding, and there's some signs that we could start to see some easterly winds over the equator here toward the end of the month, which would allow some of this cooler than normal water to rise to the surface. So that's also a good indication that the CFSP2 may be onto something, and that we could see a La Nina developing by the summer. Why is that important for our area? Well, here's the correlation between the water temperature in that Nino 3.4 region and surface air temperature over Oregon. So here I reversed the colors here to show you that cooler than average Nino 3.4 region is associated with cooler than average temperatures over Oregon. So the fact that we're maybe going to move into a La Nina state over the summer really decreases the risk of a hotter and drier summer for our area. So I wouldn't expect this summer to be excessively hot over our area. It certainly has been above average for temperatures for the last couple of years, but I wouldn't expect this summer to be exceptionally hot. So in summary, currently we're working through these warm MJO phases that favor really spring-like weather over our area, at least through mid-month. There are some occasional cooler periods possible as that cold air just passes by to our north and east, but that's mainly going to impact the Rockies and the northern plains. We do have this falling atmospheric angular momentum and the MJO progression into phase 3, which is a cooler phase, and those two teleconnections suggest that maybe we could see a slightly cooler and wetter end to April. And indeed, we could see a slightly cooler summer this year because our ENSO regions are currently cooling, and we may see a transition to a La Nina by this summer, and that really decreases the risk of a very hot summer for Southwest Oregon. Guys, thanks so much for listening all 12 minutes. Don't forget to set your notifications to receive the weekend update in a few days, and please leave a comment. I would love to hear from you if you enjoyed the forecast.